Good morning, wine world, and welcome to another edition of Silicon Valley Bank's annual State of the, it's actually not the State of the Wine Industry, this is the direct-to-consumer report, but we will do the State of the Wine Industry and look for that survey that's coming out in September. But we're grateful to be here in front of you. This is the 12th annual direct-to-consumer survey. I'm Rob McMillan, the founder of the wine industry and the founder of this report, actually. I always like to talk about the different countries that are tuning in. It always just amazes me, but we have Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, Chile, France, Germany, Italy, Lebanon, Mexico, Moldova, New Zealand, South Africa, Spain, Switzerland, and the UK, as well as obviously the US. This is a report that's watched all over the world, and we're grateful that you guys are all watching it today. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. You can turn on or off the closed captioning feature and at the bottom of your screen on the Zoom bar. And we have about 10 wine experts that are in the background, and they'll be answering your questions. So feel free to submit Q&A. Last time we had pretty much everybody's question answered through this process, so I think you'll enjoy it. Let's start by introducing our guests, though, but I'm going to have you guys introduce yourself. Andrew?
Great. So I'm Andrew Walleck. I am the Chief Operating Officer of WineAccess. To introduce myself very briefly, I'm actually kind of a newcomer to the wine world. I spent most of my career in management consulting and e-commerce. I got my MBA from Kellogg in 2013. And WineAccess is a digitally native retail DTC platform, and our specialty is in content and curation. So our job is to present what we feel are the most standout brands and the most standout wines via daily email marketing, which is a relatively traditional approach in this industry. And we've been around for, really since the beginning of the industry. Actually, the company started far before Granholm versus Held in 2005.
So digital branding.
So digital branding was the original concept, exactly.
Yep.
And we have basically an online daily sales channel. We have an online store with stocked wines, and we have several subscriptions and wine clubs that we also run throughout the country.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I am Susan DeMatei. Been in marketing for about 35 years, but I started WineGlass Marketing, which is a full-service marketing firm in Napa about 11 years ago. We do pretty much everything from branding to wholesale to D2C, and we have about 22 employees. We have clients all over the world, and I'm really pleased to be here.
All right, Rob, thank you for having me, and Andrew and Susan, thrilled to be on this panel with you. My name is Jessica Kogan. I am the former Chief Growth and Experience Officer at Vintage Wine Estates. I have been in the digital universe for a very, very long time, have had the great opportunity to build a business from $20 million to $100 million for Vintage Wine Estates direct-to-consumer business. Prior to that, I founded Cameron Hughes Wine, which is one of the first digitally native wine supplier businesses online. And prior to that, I worked in the fashion industry and the technology industry, building websites, both transactional and stationary. And it is an absolute passion of mine to work in the wine industry, especially when it comes to helping brands find their digital footing. So thrilled to be here and to talk through these really incredible and insightful results.
Well, it remains to be seen if anybody thinks they're incredible and insightful, but I hope you guys find
There's
them.
a lot of positive things in here.
There are. What I want to lead with, though, is about every 8 to 10 years, the industry goes through some sort of a cycle. And I think most people can start to figure out that we're, in a beginning of change. I'd say the last big change was probably post Granholm, where we started to look into what was ahead of us. If you think that this industry moves slow, you're probably right. But if we can just pull up slide 13 for a moment. This is a slide that shows the percent of wineries that weren't charging tasting fees in 2012, not 22, but 2000, so a decade ago. by region, and you can see what the average is on the side, but we were roughly 25% of the industry did not charge tasting fees back then. And I mean, today there's nobody I don't know of anybody that doesn't charge a tasting fee. So think about how far we've come in the direct-to-consumer model. I go back, even into 2010 or 11, and the hardest thing to do is to find somebody to take over your tasting room, because tasting room actually included then, shipping. It included digital. It included so many other things versus just hospitality, and we really didn't have that person around it at that point. So we had to go through this change, and this is just one indication of the changes that we've been through. And let's look at slide 12 now, just to bring you to where we are currently. So this is the average tasting fees by region, and you can tell here that pretty much everybody's charging, as I said before, both standard on the top and reserve on the bottom. And there's no question this ends up being part of the line. This is not about trying to recover your costs of pouring and that kind of stuff anymore. It's beyond that. It's become a big line item, and yet I think that there are some changes that maybe some people are starting to feel with these fees. I know that there are some people that are starting to change their ideas of how we price things. As an example, should you always be charging $40 for a tasting fee or $25 for a tasting fee? What about on Monday? On Monday, is that the same experience? Because you're getting what you pay for, right? Yeah. So is that the same experience on Monday that you had on Saturday, and at different times as well? And I do believe that tasting fees will go up over time. They should, just based on inflation pressures. But we're at this point where we have to start to rethink about our tasting fee structures and how we use them. Can we actually use tasting fees as an incentive to bring people in? And I'm not suggesting we have to go to zero tasting fees, but maybe somebody wants to try that at 10 o'clock in the morning on Monday. Maybe you want to have a component tasting for new consumers, because that is one of the things we need to do, is bring in new consumers into the category. Like surge pricing, like Uber. Yeah, exactly. if you want to think about it that way.
I mean, I think what you're suggesting is that tasting fees are here to stay, even though like 12 years ago it was like, how could you charge? Yep. Not only are they here to stay, but customers want more than what we're offering in those tasting fees. And part of what the industry needs to be thinking about is, what can you offer more in that experience that is beyond just doing a flight, that is beyond just some type of sit down, that is just fully a discussion just about the wine. Perhaps it is history of the location of the winery. Perhaps it is about going outside and doing a hike. I mean, there's so many ways to actually ask for more in those tasting fees if you're willing to put more into that experience.
So how do we go about asking our customers, club members, however, what kind of situation they like, or present to them in some way? Here's an idea. What do you think? How do we do that?
I mean, you ask them. You survey them. I mean, one of our favorite tasting rooms and brands is Kundi, and they have the most beautiful dog walk. Right? I mean, that the walk to the top is just gorgeous, and customers are willing to pay more for that. I would challenge them to find other parts of their campus where they can do more things, and you will get more money for it because it's an experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it's about the money, because I mean, one thing you don't say in this anywhere, which I thought was interesting, was a lot about millennials, and I know you talk about them quite a bit in the past, but one of the stats you said in January in your State of the Union, it was 55% of wine consumers are now under the age of 40. And if you consider 40,
I said that?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, you did.
That sounds smart.
And if you consider 40 roughly the cutoff for you grew up with the internet, so these consumers that are coming now, I'm not going to put a name on them, have seen choice, and they've seen different countries, and they've got a lot of opportunities. I'm married into a wonderful, huge, wacky Sicilian family, and my husband has a lot of millennial cousins. And when they get a day off or they have a long weekend, they don't go to wine country. They go to Disneyland because there's a lot of things to do. And Disneyland, I just looked it up, was $108 for a day pass. So if your tasting fee is anywhere between $81 and $128, whatever it says here in for Napa, I mean, you're competing with Disneyland because that's the frame of reference. Is they want to do different things.
That's
Absolutely.
That's one of the. Go ahead.
Let me just. I have a very similar reaction, and as the representative millennial, I completely agree on the desire to want experiences over all else. My reaction to this data was that there's a lot of room for wineries to increase, not necessarily, I'm not saying to increase the prices of their wine. I actually would say that that's maybe something to be very cautious with, depending on where you are. But there's I'm not going to mention their name, but I was very impressed by a local Napa winery I saw that was offering on Talk or one of these reservation services a wine tasting with blindfolded with oysters and then blindfolded with pizza. I think it was a fairly proud price, and I remember thinking to myself, gosh, they're selling $5 worth of pizza for $50. That is an exceptional way both to drive margin as well as to drive engagement. Like, what is wine really for? It's for sharing. It's for pairing with food. It is a condiment, right? Like, there's all these there's all these new exciting ways that you can basically give people a tool to go home to their family and friends and say, look at this cool thing I did. I'm going to recreate it at home. I'm going to learn a new way to use the product.
Today's consumer want variety. They want options, and they want community. Whereas the experiences that we have set up are these sort of one-on-one tastings or a small group. They're very educational. It's a very boomer way of spending your time versus some of the newer consumers. I completely agree with that.
You were mentioning the other day about kind of what happened in the gallery industry with how they saw like slower visitation and they had to innovate, and they started doing these like headphone visitations and these video visitations.
The museum industry went through this about 15 years ago, and they started retraining their docents, and they were doing more interactive exhibits, and they had things for children to do. And now, going to the museum is a very interactive and exciting experience versus, just staring at a picture on the wall. So we can change. It can happen.
I have my own view about, and I'll voice it in a second. But in the next 10 years ahead, I think when you look at just volume, demand, and everything else, we're slowing down. I think everybody acknowledges that. But what does the next 10 years look like? What do you guys think the next 10 years? Where's the focus go?
Wow. So that's a really good question. I think that
why I asked.
I have a response, but if you don't mind, I'm going to start by saying what I think the next 18 months to 2 years looks like, and then the next 10 years. So I think the next 18 months to 2 years is all about getting closer to your core customer and figuring out the blocking and tackling of making those relationships work economically for both parties.
Yeah.
So fuel costs have risen by double. Labor costs are up 50%.
Yeah.
The cost of capital in the capital markets has risen exceptionally. Basically, every major cost that goes into direct to consumer, right, picking and packing boxes and shipping them across the country to individuals, has gone up tremendously.
Yes.
And depending on your point of view, there may be a recession coming, there may not be. One of the first things consumers tend to look at is where their recurring expenses in their credit card that they can easily cut. So you have to both, for the next 18 months to 2 years, think about how am I going to make my relationships with my existing customers work economically as well as I possibly can, and how can I stay ahead of the curve, both in terms of how I fulfill to those customers, what types of experiences I bring them, what benefits I offer that make them want to keep me in their limited and shrinking set of recurring expenses.
Right.
So the 2-year answer for me is just doubling down and refocusing on getting closer and building the relationships with the customers who've already voted you in, who've already said, I want to be a part of this experience.
Well, look at slide 4 as far as the use of digital resources. You know, I think a lot of that has to do with surveying and looking at responses. And, you know, we were talking last night at dinner about your complex drip programs and how you have people in individual conversations online. The days of mass sending out emails and just kind of assuming you know what your customers want is gone. Like you need to be surveying your customers. You need to know who's in your database. You need to segment that, and you need to talk to them individually.
See, I'm gonna push back just a little bit on that. I think that, I mean, when you look at this chart, it just shows you how much email is relied upon. But that's looking backwards, by the way. That's not to suggest that, you know, we should increase that because that's the highest usage. That doesn't really necessarily make sense. You're really looking for what's the ROI on different things.
The most effective.
And I don't, email is not going away for sure.
It can't.
There's a 40 to 1 ROI on email.
It can't go away because it tells a story, and part of the wine business is the story. But
100%.
in terms of digital tools, digital tool sets, an emerging tool that the industry should absolutely be looking at and considering is SMS texting, because the
Which
open
is
rates
on the bottom of this chart. That's,
the open rates are massive.
Was it
We're talking
14%, something
between
like that?
95 to 100% open rates.
Yep.
Because generally consumers will give you their phone number directly.
Yep.
And it is a great way to send a very short message.
Yep.
And for the customer to take action very quickly when you're offering a payment method. So again, I think this goes back to everything in the industry right now. We're like actually in a much better place than we all think we are. Now it's time to lean in to the next transformation, which is really digitally driven.
Yeah,
And it's about offering choice. It's not like, oh, I'm going to just stop all email and do SMS, right? Because some consumers are going to want to communicate one way, and some are going to want to communicate the other way. But it's exciting. Not only is it's exciting with all the choice and the options that we have now, but it's not expensive. A lot of these digital options are not, you know, half, a quarter, a tenth of the expense of a tasting room.
Totally. I had a very similar reaction. I thought that number should be higher. I don't think email can go away. I completely agree. But I thought, you know, some people don't, you know, it can be uncomfortable to start with a new platform. And you know, a suggestion I could make is that it can be start very, very easily. You just start by saying, we're going to just text you delivery and premium tracking information. That's it, right? You're going to start with just, hey, you'd like to know when the package is on its way to you or when the shipment's arriving. You need to be able to sign for it as an adult signature. We're just going to start by communicating with you more transactionally on when the wine is on its way to you. That is actually a great way to get started, and requires very, as you said, little to no investment, little to no additional compliance headache, et cetera. And that would be a great way for, you know, for wineries to begin communicating with their customers without even thinking yet about how we would use it to market. Because one of the double-edged swords that I've observed about SMS is if you start using it to market to people too quickly, that can be a big turnoff.
Only.
Yeah.
And
If that's all you're doing, yeah.
Very
because
light
it is so
touch.
very light touch because
Very light
it's
touch.
so intimate, right? You know, everybody opens, as you said, 95, 100% of their texts. You have to really treat that carefully. It has to be done right.
So what that chart was kind of showing was a little bit where we have been, which is email, and kind of where we need to go, which is text and other digital. And in the very edge of that chart, which you can barely see, it says ChatGPT is an example of other digital resources. And I don't really want to go into AI and machine learning and things like that.
That's a whole nother conference.
People are overusing the terms, I think. But there is a point to them. And I just believe in the next decade, what really is going to happen is the winners are going to be the ones that actually figure out digital, figure out how to collect information, how to append information. You know, you have clients that are in a certain spot, and there's another set of information you can drag on top of them, and then how you're going to analyze that. There are more and more people that are in the analytics side that can help your winery, both as vendors and as individuals. And I think, like I said earlier, that the hardest thing to find back in, let's just say 2010, was the person that was, you know, the hospitality manager in the tasting room, and then you're asking him to do the internet, right? And we didn't have those people. I think in the next 10 years, it's going to be people that are into data in marketing, specifically marketing. In other places you'll find it too, but digital and marketing is going to be the thing. And if you look right now, I normally don't call out too many business. I don't. It's not the way I really like to roll. But I just think it's worthwhile noticing analytics, Customer Vineyard, Commerce 7. Those are 3 examples of companies that are doing a really good job providing information and data that can allow actionable responses. But this whole notion of having everybody have to come through the tasting room to sign up for the club to move on, we found that didn't work during COVID, and the great opportunity of this industry. And let's face it, especially in the premium side, we're seeing growth still. It's a growth industry. And so the great opportunity is, how do you shape that J curve up on the next rung? How do you move it up to the next one? And it's always got to be a change in something that moves you on. Otherwise, you're gonna drop off. That's just the nature of business. So the next J curve, in my opinion, is that we get, somebody said it earlier, closer to the customer. And that is going to be done by understanding the customer, and you have to do it in a scaled way, and the only way to do that is with digital. Digital has arrived, information is there, the vendors are there, the people are there, but we're at the beginning of it. It shows in that one slide, SMS text, ChatGPT, it's just the beginning of that. And if we're going to be in a more flattish sort of a growth era, let's just say it goes up by inflation, we have winners and losers, and it's our job actually as winery owners to figure out how to better position our brand for success, going forward. And it's going to have to be a change. And
Well, you want to see a change, look at slide 7. That is remarkable as far as, if you go back, you were looking, this report has a retrospective where you're looking 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we would have never seen that, and people using social media.
Yeah.
And I'm interpreting social media marketing as paid, as actually doing paid ads on it. And, social commerce is supposed to reach about $2.9 trillion by 2026. People are buying on Instagram, they're buying on Facebook.
Yeah.
So this is definitely an area that I think is ripe with opportunity.
Eventually, we'll be able to sell in their stores. But I want to go back to something that Rob was saying related to AI, which I know we don't want to talk too much about.
AI spamming is what I call it.
But I do want to acknowledge that on the production side of the wine industry, very cutting edge technology is discussed all the time. Like it truly is. How can I make my regimen smarter? How can I control, how can I optimize, my trials?
The new LiDAR and the vineyard, yeah.
And I think it's almost as if maybe it's not those people, but the other side has to be thinking, and that's the type of thinking that needs to be happening in marketing with systems. Yep. What are the systems that are going to connect me closer to a customer? If 76% of your customers in the United States are getting their information online, and most of their information about your brand online, yep, what systems are you using to connect to that customer to bring them to your home, to your tasting room? And we have to really be thinking, like, what does digital transformation look like for the other half of the business, marketing?
That's a really good. We talked about that briefly last night, right? Mm-hmm. Like I think wine as an industry, in certain aspects, is some of the most technocratic and advanced maybe in the whole economy, right? Yeah. So winery owners sitting at home, right? If you went and talked to your winemaker and said, "Oh, I found some extra money, left over this year. What do you think about an optical sorter?" Right? 99 out of 100 would be like, "Heck yeah! Like it's really advanced technology. It's super cutting edge. Let's do it." Right? But they jump right in. But I don't know that same amount of money, if we were like, well, we have an opportunity to really understand our different customer cohorts to a different degree. We think we can,
let's get Salesforce to do a data append or a better
do a data
website.
Append, and let's figure out who our customers really are and what they really want out of a tasting room experience. I think you'd maybe get a more skeptical response. And I think that's the sort of like the
Yep.
river we must cross, I think, to get the
Yes.
industry where it needs to go.
Even though 100 times more people are going to see your website
Even
than
though
ever
100
walked into your tasting room.
Let's go to slide 8 for just a moment, because this is one more place where I think we're watching the transformation of the industry. And this is a little bit controversial. So the left side of this is, and you can see in the top, there's different regions. The left side is walk-in. The middle is by appointment tastings, and the right side is both. And the easiest way to look at this is that arrow that I drew into this chart. And so you can see what's happened with walk-in. That was the traditional model. That was the balloons on the mailbox, and you hope you hope somebody comes by and sees the balloons because you're open. We have to be a little bit beyond that. And until very recently, we had a ton of pushback on that whole notion. Now Napa in the center thing, in the by appointment, they're pretty much regulated to be by appointment, so that's why they're kind of flattish. But what wineries really are leaning into heavily now is both, and that's a quick change. And I think we talked a little bit about why that change happened last night.
COVID. I mean, COVID was a huge, contributor to moving towards appointments. Obviously, it's always been going on in Napa, but you're seeing it in other regions, and now you are beginning to see a blend. But that being said, for the hospitality teams, appointments help them manage their workforce needs in such a more efficient way. So
that was the great discovery.
That was a great discovery.
Well, that may be, and I don't really work in hospitality that much, but I do like the fact that a lot of people are doing both, because what I'm assuming is you're sort of bifurcating your efforts, right? And you have people who do want the education, they do want to sit down, they do want the reserve tasting, but then you have a group that just wants to be with their friends and do something on the way to something else, and you can service both types. And I think that's another train of thought I would really encourage wineries is to think of different kinds of consumers and what can don't do a one like you were saying in the Monday morning tasting or this, like maybe you have like a wine 101 and then you have your reserve or things like that diversify based on your audience that's walking in.
It comes back to the vibe that the region wants to set also, right? Like I remember the first time I visited Napa, 15 years ago, it was pretty normal to drive up to the gate of the winery and press the call button and see if they had space, and 9 times out of 10 they did. These days I wouldn't recommend that people try that, but if you're shooting for a more casual wine region, a little more easygoing, in contrast to wine regions that are perhaps a little more formal, that's one way that you can have offering both is one way to enable people to basically have, it depends on the type of experience and the type of, frankly, vacation when they're visiting a wine country that your consumers want, right? Do they want something laid back and easy and we'll just kind of figure out our day as we go? Or do they want sort of a 10 a.m., a 2 p.m., a 4 p.m., and then dinner?
I do have to say, when you can get some operational efficiency in that tasting room, ultimately it's the customer that wins because the customer will get more attention.
Totally.
And as we all know, when customers come to visit a tasting room and they have an amazing experience, they take it home with them. And that's the primary reason. And tell 5 people. And the primary reason that they join the wine club, because they want to remember that time and that moment and what it meant to them. So I think anything we can do operationally, organizationally to improve the tasting room experience, customer to customer, open to additional customers. I'm obviously that's not my area of expertise, but I can tell you it will pay massive dividends.
So one of the things we talked about a lot last night was taking the experience on the road.
Yes.
Something I've been talking about for quite some time, that we really, really need to do that. COVID proved that, making everybody go through the tasting room really is not the greatest idea. It's not that we want to move away from tasting room, it's what we want additive. If we want growth, we've got to figure out where the new places are that we can hit up. And back to the issue of data. With data now, you could figure out where your wine club members are. Analytics does this, by the way. So call up Tim.
Anybody would.
But there's others that do it. But you can figure out where your tasting room members are. your club members, pardon me, are. You can figure out where your retailers are selling in that region. You can look at hot spots in the United States. With that, you can say, okay, I'm going to be the best winery for Dubuque, Iowa, because I have that all lined up in there, and so there's that natural synergy. I'm not starting from scratch. That's one of the things that data can help you do, and be more specific about the way you're attacking an individual region. Most of the wineries can't go national. It really just doesn't make any sense. So you gotta pick your spots. Do you want to all be in New York City? It's pretty competitive. But that's one way to go about it, I guess.
The heat mapping zip codes is it's such a no-brainer, because customers who are buying your wine, your DTC customers, along with your wholesalers, you can show your wholesalers, hey, here are my DTC customers who love my wine, and will consider hosting an event, possibly at their place, with you attending, is everything. Is everything.
And the experience is different. You can still charge a tasting fee if you wanted. You have hoteliers out there that would be more than happy to sponsor your event, obviously, and work with you to get the wines in. So that's one way. And while you're doing it, you can stop in on your retail accounts as well.
Yep.
There's a lot of wineries that are already doing that, but if we continue to just focus on the tasting room as the sole way to do it, because it's always worked, that J-shaped curve is not. We're not going to go to the next level. We've got to find the growth, and it's the growth has got to come from us now, taking gullet share, as I call it, away from somebody else. So it's whether that's non-alcoholic, whether it is
RTDs,
energy drinks, spirits. It's got to come from somewhere. Guess what? Everybody consumes liquid. and that's not changing. So it's how do we get them to include what we sell in their daily lives?
Well, I think I like the idea of the geotagging, because we almost never, when a client comes to us, say, well, we're just going to advertise everywhere, because it's incredibly inefficient. And if you don't know where your key markets are, or even states, you're wasting a lot of money. Going back to the tasting room idea, though, and the different types of experiences, one thing to keep in mind is, again, people that grew up with the internet, I'm not going to use the word, they don't necessarily have the same idea of luxury as people who didn't. They're looking at ease. They're looking at, DoorDash is luxury, Zipcar is luxury, something where they can just sort of pop in and pop out. So don't be afraid if you're a luxury brand and you don't do by appointments or something fancy. That might be your version of luxury, but not theirs. And so luxury can be casual. Luxury doesn't have to be, formal or educational or dry or, what the traditional upscale is. It can be going to one of these markets and going to a baseball game.
Let's if we can flip to slide 19 for a second. And this is some of the, let's call it, other ways of getting money, through channels. And so that purple line that you see there is that's internet. That's digital sales through the web. And when we hit COVID, I thought that the industry would take that and just suck it up, and they would do an amazing job, and you would see that line continue out, that would be the beginning of digital change. And to some extent it is. Once we started to put that much attention into digital, you would think that we would pour more money into it, because the opportunity is clearly there. But
we went right back to where we were.
Yeah, the idea of restart post-COVID for us ends up being, let's get back to the way we were. And again, I'm encouraging people to look for the next 10 years, and digital is going to be the way. If we can, let's...
a really interesting stat that I want to share with you. By 2025, this is from Mercatus, there will be 150 million customers buying groceries online.
150 million.
150 million. Just sit on that for a moment. because I really think this underscores the point of this is not the time to abandon your move towards digitization. The physical will always be the most important aspect of what you do, but knowing that customers are searching for you, looking for you online, is critically important. And being available to customers, whether it's on Safeway.com or Instacart or at the local store through Drizzly, it is critically important for wine brands to think in those terms.
Couldn't agree more.
I couldn't agree more. I think that I think if this data we were looking at, let's speculate for a moment. Let's say this wasn't survey results. Let's say that this was actually changes in volume.
Yeah.
That little, that purple line is like shooting off of the edge of the page. So if you can think about the experience of digitally native companies like mine, but also Drizzly and Bevmo and companies that allow a digital quick experience for delivery, they've done nothing except get better and better at that part of the experience. And I think one of the if I can again speculate, one of the reasons I think that you see reversion to the mean is, with the revolution of direct-to-consumer after 2005, wineries had to get good at their tasting room, and then they also had to get good at having a wine club.
Yep.
And with the onset of COVID and really no other chance to get in front of their consumer, then they also had to become good at e-commerce.
Yes, correct.
Right, so the chances that this entire industry is going to all, on average, become awesome at e-commerce, I hope that is what happens. But I think you're asking, thousands and thousands of individual participants to now learn another new skill, and I think the future will be more like you're describing, people who are able to channel and aggregate demand and get in front of a lot of digital consumers.
Yeah, I mean, you can see that in slide 17. I mean, all of our eggs are in those two baskets, tasting room and wine club, and that's scary. I mean, again, another COVID happens, that big red part of the pie goes away. So I think what is also too, look at the cost to serve and the cost to acquire online versus a tasting room, all the costs that go into a tasting room. Yep. And you can it's your own personal petri dish. You can test all sorts of different things.
Absolutely.
Let's look at slide 6, because that's I think that's kind of going off where you're headed, Susan. This is club memberships that are generated versus traditional methods, vis-a-vis walking in the tasting room, converting that new customer, and then the light blue is getting by digital means. And if you want to go back to let's call it 2019, the number of wineries that were actually even working at trying to get anybody through digital means was small. And you can see the ones that are having more success. It's because they're putting more focus on it. It's the $50,000 to $250,000 case wineries, and it is really reassuring to see that the other wineries by size are in there as well. But this is one more indication of the fact that we are moving into a digital world. I mean, that's a meaningful number of people. So if we move on to slide 14 for a second. So this is a kind of an elephant in the room thing. People are, as I talk around the industry, they've been worried about visitation this year.
Yes.
And if you are doing digital, then this slide doesn't really bother you as much, because as other things might ebb, you might be reaching out and finding new highs in digital acquisition. Club, for the very first time this year in our data, we've been doing it, like I said, for 12 years, Club for the very first time exceeded tasting room in terms of share of revenue. This is something, though, I think the industry is dwelling on this one little thing. A quick sidebar on this is, if you talk to people in the industry, they're saying, God, it's off this year. We just expected it to be better. And I honestly look at this more, this decline in visitation, decline in revenue, if you will. I see this as a more or less an echo of COVID. So let's go back for one moment. And if you look at 2020, that was, for premium wineries, that was a very, very difficult year. For mass production wineries, that was a great year. You know, if you go the other way and you look at 2021, it flipped on its head, and so that was very difficult for high production wineries. 2021 was the best year that the premium wineries had in at least the last decade. And then everybody thought, okay, well, 2021 will continue. Well, you know, it's hard to really continue on the best of the decade, right? So I think naturally we would drop. The thought, I think, by many of us was, well, 2022, you know, is going to be maybe not as good as 21, but it'll be really good, and it was. But let's remember, 2021, we just started to take people out of their homes, and we had you know, masking mandates that were starting to loosen. We had vaccinations. That was the beginning of change, but people still didn't get into their deferred experience sets, whether it was weddings or showers, retirement, vacations. And so as we get into this year, we're still comparing off of a very good base. And so when you look at those numbers kind of coming down in visitation, yeah, it's, you know, it's annoying at a minimum, but you're comparing it off of a good base. We're not that far off of where we were in 2019, actually. So I don't see it as being that big of a deal right now. You know, I just expect that well, let me back up one step. So what we ended up with is, if you look at the TSA data right now, which, by the way, doesn't include a lot of business travel like it used to, right? Business travel used to be a big part of travel, and with Zoom, you don't have to travel quite as much. So we finally exceeded 2019 traveler numbers, I think in June, if I'm remembering right. So we're finally back there, but where's that coming from? It's coming from the consumer. It's coming from the consumer that's got some money to travel. And if you look at the travel that happened in Europe this past year was, I mean, I wouldn't have wanted to go actually. Yeah,
it was insane.
Yeah, I wouldn't have wanted to go, but I think that's probably why we're seeing this slight, you know, off tick. I expect next year, 24, I think we'll start to see some recovery. I think we're going to revert to the norm the other direction, though. So I don't see this single data point as being indicative of dropping demand or anything like that. I think 24 is going to be a good year.
But I would add to that, Rob, that doesn't mean that we get rusty and that we just say, you know what, okay, it's just going to come back. In fact, all of the tactics that we've been discussing about how to bring customers to the tasting room, changing, you know, the ideas around experience, outbounding to customers in a way that is exciting and delightful to them, are all part of bringing customers back to the tasting room in a way that they want to come.
Yep. And I want to build on something too, because you were basically, you know, describing this in contrast to the folks who are making more efforts in digital marketing and growing their digital sort of base of their wine club members. That is actually a huge opportunity. You know, the data says that only a very small number of consumers are doing that. If done properly, and if you make it easy, like if you allow your existing wine club members to gift. We were talking last night about parents gifting a subscription to their kids, right? Making that easy. Just gifting in general, being able to, as a purchase or as a present, have one of your current wine club members refer or bring someone else into the fold. Right. Just allowing that as an option I virtually guarantee you will see a huge uptick in digitally won or digitally acquired wine club members.
And it really is simple technology. I mean, it really is customer friendly and like workflow, internal back office workflow friendly for wineries that are maybe a little bit shy of digital. You know, all the new SaaS platforms, you know, WineDirect, Commerce7, Shopify, they all have this built in.
Well, it goes back to knowing your customers, you know, and collecting data on them and knowing what they like, what they don't like, and, you know, recommending. We were, again, talking about when you know somebody has been in the club for a while and you know they already have kids, you know, recommend that they're giving it. We also talked about down ramping or off ramping. If you have some older club members, giving them options to consume a little less but still stay part of you.
Yep.
it's change, and it's knowing your customers.
You know, when we look at data about unsubscribes or people who have opted out of wine clubs, it's almost always one of those three categories: health reasons, too much wine in the cellar, or reducing consumption. And I'm shocked how few wineries have built a product that matches that state of a consumer's new lifestyle. Right, they find themselves in a lifestyle where they're still open, interested in wine, but maybe less, or maybe smaller formats, or something that will allow them to continue to enjoy and stay a member without sort of booting them out. Saying, oh, great, well, your cellar's full, see you later.
You're in or you're out, right?
Right, exactly.
And
It's like your most loyal customers are your most evangelical customers.
Totally.
Even if they can't purchase it right now, there always should be a way for them to step into something special that isn't advertised, but that is unique to them. And Rob, for our friends in hospitality, are we going to be talking at all about tipping?
Yeah. Do you have that up? Do you have that page number?
I believe that is, do you guys remember?
16.
16. So this is really a shout out to my friends who work in hospitality, who have just outperformed on every single level in terms of trying to build amazing experiences for guests of wineries. There is a strong belief that the work that is done by associates should be tipped. It is complex information. They are the first line of defense in representing the values and the mission of the brand. And if you ask customers, 3 to 6 months after their visit, typically, they can remember the name of the associate that was there to help them. So I believe it is a matter of principle that the wine industry should be allowing associates to be tipped. First, it incentivizes them to outperform, which they already are, but it also gives them an opportunity to possibly even make a little more money. For example, asking the folks, the customers that they're tasting, for their mobile phone numbers, to send them a link to write a review on how they did. Once they fill that out, you actually get a review posted to your site. Once reviews are posted to your site, you go higher in the algorithms. So it can only be a positive to support your front line as best as you can.
It also helps the consumer, because the consumer can now interact and can show their appreciation or do something. I think, I think it's got benefits on the participation side as well.
Yeah.
Probably, I hope people were able to see the subtitle in that chart. But again, I went back and compared a bunch of 2012 data to 2022, and in 2014, actually, in this case, only 21% of wineries use tips. And today it's 69, almost 70% of wineries that are using tips, and so it was very, very controversial, back in 2014. You didn't want hospitality folks grubbing for tips, but I mean, think about where we were. We had tip jars, we had bowls where people could put their business cards in. Just things that you don't really see anymore. And if you want to go back to where we were, just to show you the kind of growth that we've had as an industry, it was really hard to, and it's still hard, by the way, to get a qualified tasting room staff in. But it's so much better. Back a decade ago, it was a lot of retirees. People with time on their hands earning a couple bucks on the side, and they may or may not know anything. They may or may not have been even trained. You're just looking for warm bodies, and that's not what's happening anymore. You have professionals now that are in tasting room and hospitality, and in the U.S., tipping is it's kind of a normal thing. Yeah, there's the opposite side to that, right?
I mean, again, like speaking to stats, like the turnover goes way down when you're offering tipping. And yes, it is getting a little ridiculous. Like you go to the coffee bar and it's like, $1 for a tip. I mean, we're talking about people who are presenting an entire brand story for 2.5 hours.
Right.
To me, this is like, I was a server when I was in college. Like the work they're doing is way more articulate, way more reflective. and really drawing in people to a brand for a lifetime.
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, we all, there was that WSJ article about, the proliferation of the tip screen, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
completely robotic vending machines asking for a tip. And it's like, wait a minute, where's this going? But I completely agree. Like, on the spectrum of, most deserving, cohorts of, employees in your winery for the tip, they are the ones telling your story.
Yeah.
They are the tip of the spear. They're the ones actually talking to the customer.
Yes.
And the talent and the sort of the effort that they put into that is the heart of your business. So I see no reason that they shouldn't share in some of the upside.
Let's go to.
Can we look at 28?
Could we look at 20? Sure,
Yeah.
well, let's look at 28. I wasn't going that way, but let's go look at 28.
28 is my soapbox.
All right. Get on the box.
Shipping. It's Amazon has trained everybody to get not only free shipping, but get it in 2 days, which is easy for Amazon to do because they're vertically integrated and they own their own shipping vehicles. We have to rely on the good people at Wine Shipping and Wine Direct, but we need to figure out a way to, if you're not already, baking in some of the shipping, if not all of the shipping, into your cost of goods. And so that you can provide something a little bit more palatable, than I've ordered 6 bottles and I'm going to pay, $79 to get it shipped to me.
The same
Yep,
cost
and-
of
Yeah,
the
the same.
me-
It's ridiculous.
Let me share your soapbox by saying
Yeah.
that I think that this is an area where there's a ton of opportunity for wineries to work more closely with either their, maybe they're working directly with a carrier, maybe they work with Wine Shipping or with Wine Direct or any of the other fulfillment partners that exist. There's a lot that could still be done here to try to push up the number of consumers who are getting included or free shipping in their transaction. A couple of examples. So a lot of wineries push all of their orders right around their release, right? If you're signed up to get a wine club and you've got, 200 members, often they'll just basically throw them into the system and then have them ship. Think about when you go to Amazon, right? If you're looking at Amazon's checkout, it'll say, well, do you want it tomorrow? Great, it'll be there tomorrow. Do you not care when it shows up, right? If it shows up in the next 5 days, would you be okay with that? Great, we're going to give you $5 off of Amazon Music or whatever, right? Some small promotion or discount is included. Baking in this idea of helping, of smoothing out fulfillment peaks to the way that you actually price your wine is something that pretty much every fulfillment partner I'm aware of is very open to, but also it can basically, think about how many consumers that exist where they're getting their wine club shipped to their locker. They don't care when it shows up.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's another pitch for data. You have data, and you should have it. You know how many bottles were sold, what shipping cost they paid, who they paid it to. There's analytics that you can apply to your shipping information that you have organically if you're collecting it, and that'll help you make your operational business decisions.
So I think the important thing is wineries look at the sale, the checkout as the end, and that's not really the end.
Yeah.
There's shipping as a service, communication around shipping we talked about
Yep.
last night. I know Wine Shipping has some new software that is doing some amazing updates, just like Amazon does. Amazon texts you when they're 2 blocks away. That's the consumer norm, and that's what people are expecting.
Yep.
So you need to up your game when you're talking about some of these automated emails, and you need to really look at the delivery all the way to the door and how that's being priced and handled.
Yeah, premium tracking and being able to basically give consumers visibility into the most common of questions. Where's my stuff? When will it be here? Right. That is a service that Wine Shipping offers, and it's actually quite good.
Yeah.
But I think even working directly, even if you only have a relationship with your carrier, all of those tools are available.
They are.
And it's still shocking to me how many wine club members that I meet tell me like, oh yeah, well my stuff just kind of shows up. I don't. That's I guess the deal.
Or you're
right?
using the out-of-the-box emails to communicate all of this really important things.
So for all wineries out there who do have an e-commerce site, when you ask your customers for phone numbers for their addresses, in the box, ask for their mobile number. Always ask for the mobile number, because FedEx and UPS and other third-party carriers are allowed to send texts to mobile numbers regarding the
Delivery
status of your
status.
package.
And when you're looking at appending your own data, there's a lot of things that change, like your address, even your last name in some cases can change.
Yep.
but your phone number.
Your phone number doesn't change.
Doesn't
so
change.
when you're looking at data and trying to append data onto yours, that's one of the ways. Let's do one last
of
quick
course.
quick thing on slide 35 if we can.
Sure.
And this is again just one of these data points that I think is really cool. And if you look at this, it shows you the changes that we're having in average wine purchases, just urban or winery choices. So if you go to the winery, it's obviously you know what that is. And urban is, we didn't really define it in the survey, but I think you kind of know what it is. And when we first started having urban tasting rooms pop up, again, it's all about learning. It's about growth. It's about directional change. And you can't get to the end until you start making that first step in that journey.
Yeah.
But going back to when we started opening urban tasting rooms, you would see conversations about, well, what are you going to charge for a fee? And the answer was, well, we're going to charge, let's just say $40. Why are you charging $40? Because that's what we charge in the winery. Well, it's a different experience. And actually, as you look at conversion rates, which you'll see in the report, conversion rates are not as good in the urban tasting room as they are in the winery tasting room, but they're there. It's another source. And what I see now, and I really like, is the fee structures have changed. The sales are a little bit different. The people that maybe are hosting the downtown tasting room are different. The people that are walking into the downtown, it's more walk-in, by the way, into the downtown tasting room, have shorter time span to stay. They're probably just wanting a taste. They just came around for a vacation or whatever, and so they just want to taste through. They want to understand your wine. Collect the data, by the way, the second they walk in. But because now you have somebody that's actually tried the wine. But we've moved, again, this is another spot where we as an industry have moved along in a really positive way on urban tasting rooms. Not everybody needs to have an urban tasting room, but they can be, quite handy. And so I'm really excited about the next decade. If you want to look at all the things that are going to go wrong, there's some things that we have to address. The category is flattened, and it's not where we want to be. But it's going to be up to every individual winery to figure out how you're going to create these on-ramps. And the way you're going to create these on-ramps, the way you're going to get new consumers, is by taking the show on the road, by figuring out where those groups of consumers are that you can get down and market into. It's going to be by collecting members, not giving away the tasting room thing. The tasting room you got to keep, emails you got to keep, but you've got to take it to the next step. Let's see all the wineries make some directional improvement in digital, starting to figure out how to use your data. Check with the vendors that are out there. Start to think about how you're going to position for a marketing job for somebody that actually understands data, that somebody understands how to use some of the tools that are out there and useful. And experiment. But we're out of time.
I want to add one quick thing.
All right, one thing.
Spend money on marketing. The SBA recommends for small businesses that you spend between 6 and 8% of your gross product on marketing. The wine industry spends 2%. So we are massively being overspent by other things for people to do, other places for them to go, and other products. So all those things that you just mentioned, you're going to have to spend some money for it, and it'll be worth it.
And I'm taking it back. I didn't realize we were going to 10:30. I didn't get that. I didn't get that memo.
Oh, fantastic!
All right.
So we actually have a half hour.
All right.
Let's continue on then. Find another chart to talk about.
Sure.
Let's
So
see
I like
here.
29. I want to talk about club members.
There's plenty to talk about, by the way.
Yeah.
Well, so I think this is another area where, again, I'll return to my core theme of, for the next at least 2 years, blocking and tackling is going to be what separates the winners from the losers. So on the right-hand side, you have wine club attrition rates, and they're relatively static across the different groups. one of the things that I'm very interested in is, even a small dent on the chart on the right makes the chart on the left way more valuable, which is what comes out on the next slide. So a couple of examples of areas that wineries could do some work. Working on pay fails, right? How do you handle your pay fails today, which is one of the most common forms of wine club attrition? The credit card is expired, or it's for whatever reason not working.
SMS text.
SMS texting.
SMS text.
Hey, we need to update your payment information. Right, because there's always going to be some number of consumers who don't want to be contacted and they're just basically ghosting. But there are some who would like to still be part of the club. Right, so not only having a better process and better technology there, but also having a more robust sort of, or more, perhaps even a more tolerant attitude towards skipping, right? Yeah. Oh, no big deal. You can get your payment card rather than booting them, right? Yeah. And getting them out of your list and sort of saying goodbye to them forever, right? Think about, well, how much slack should I give this person? The next is returns. Return goods is one of my favorite areas of all logistics. And return goods is where you can figure out either I didn't communicate properly, the person has moved, or that something else went wrong in transit that is an opportunity for me to fix the situation and get it right and get the wine back to where it's supposed to be, which is in the consumer's hands. Working on those small and I will say thorny topics is a great way to chip away at the rates on the right.
Totally. May I also add into their offering multiple payment methods?
Yes.
Right? I mean,
really good one.
It's just, it's today, it's now, it's the future. Offering Google Pay, Android Pay,
Apple
any
Pay,
Venmo, any kind of pay that does not require a customer to take out their credit card and or have to sign up for something, even if they are a wine club member already. That frictionless free payment method has shown in case study after case study, the conversion on that is the highest, period, end of story.
So what kind of data can you pull, back to data, what kind of data do you pull from somebody that makes a payment with their cell phone as an example?
So I can pull like PayPal data, I can pull MasterCard data, Amex data, all of it. And I can see what is rejected often, and I can see what has been frictionless. And typically we see PayPal, Apple Pay really frictionless because they deal with the trouble after versus the before. And the whole payment system in this universe, I mean, there was a reason Square got into the game. It's owned by two conglomerates that are the merchant banking end of transactions. But at the end of the day, you will win in digital if you can offer a frictionless free payment method. The reason Shopify became so fast, so big, was because of Shop Pay.
Yep.
Well, and I go back to frictionless in the communication. We have seen, I mean, it's crazy when you actually spend time and you write well-written communicative emails that are designed. You can, I mean, the open rates go up to the 80s, 90%. The click-through rate on our redesigned, your credit card has been expired or going to expire, is 52% of people clicking through and updating their card. So yes, texting, absolutely, but you've got to hit it from multiple angles, and the better you can communicate around your club, the better expectations they have, and you will meet them.
But also think about the time, that the wine club team spends dealing with declines, right? I mean, removing that decline piece totally by having all of these other payment methods available to you makes such a big difference.
And then you also have, I mean, as a banker, I kind of know this, is you have an auto update feature that a lot of banks provide, that when somebody's credit card, their payment method, whatever it is, just expires, it's auto updated from software at the bank side.
I think most of the platforms have that.
Yeah. It's also another advantage of gifting or prepaying, right? So if you can get a year's worth of subscription fee up front and not have to worry about it for a full year, that's way better than having to fight them on every charge.
Absolutely.
Right?
Can we look at 31? It's along the same topics, but it's basically, I just want to bring up the point that I think people should start to expect more churn with their clubs, because again, I'm talking generations, but people born before the internet are joiners, you know, and it's more of a loyalty aspect where they've done the research, they've tried all the wineries, they've met the winemakers, they've done the tastings and the education, and they've decided this is my winery and I want to join it for life, you know. They're now, for health reasons, budget reasons, you know, maybe they're on a cruise around the world, I don't know, but they're cutting back on spending. So that's going to continue to go down. The new group of consumers that we have the opportunity to serve have grown up with a ton of choice. And their method of trial is subscriptions. So what subscriptions are not a replacement for a wine club. Subscriptions are top of the funnel. I'm going to try this, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try this, and then I'm going to leave it after 3 months. If you look at anything like Birchbox or Stitch Fix, they all have 3-month trials. That's like what they're expecting somebody to come in, they're going to try different things, and they're going to move. So you need to start also looking at your metrics on how am I going to handle that. The opportunity here is that there are millions of, you know, millennials and Gen Zers on their way, and they like trying things. They have an intrinsic nature to want to constantly be trying things. So you will have a lot more churn, and don't freak out at that. I think the opportunity is you're just going to continually get people. That's going to be a new trial and a top of the funnel activity for you.
Yeah. No, I saw in the questions, I saw a lot of
Concern,
anxiety and concern
yes.
about like sort of how to manage the wine club.
It's
So
very expected.
I want to build on what you're saying by going to slide 25, which talks about how to deal with discounts, not just discounts on shipping, but discounts on products. So a couple of ideas I wanted to kind of talk through with this one. So I think that a lot of the concept of the wine club, I think, began with the concept of product discounts kind of intrinsically linked, right? People began with this idea of, oh, well, if you're a wine club member, obviously you get a discount. I'm not sure where that obviously came from, but it came from somewhere.
Yeah.
Right? So I think a consideration or a rethink I'd encourage wineries to make is, do you need to discount everything, and do you need to discount it as heavily as you are discounting it for your members, or is the wine club member looking for value? Value meaning, hey, we made this one particular SKU just for you guys. It's our winemaker's special reserve select. It's made in a different barrel strategy. It's got a cool story attached to it, and it's just for you guys. Nobody else can have it, just you, right? That's a really, you know, there's all kinds of angles that I don't know have been explored as thoroughly as just a straight up discount, because part of it too is, I think it's fine to offer a discount on purchases above and beyond the wine club. I think that makes a lot of sense. But if you're, you know, getting it shipped to you and it's also discounted, and it's also just sort of like, hey, this is just a bunch of stuff I could have just gotten, I guess, out of the store, you know, if I had decided to swing by that day, it makes it a little harder to argue for why they should stay in. Because it's like, oh, well, you know, if it's just this year's release of the Sauvignon Blanc and this year's release of the Chardonnay and this year's release of the Cab, like, you know, I'll just pick it up next time I'm
Well, it should be
shopping.
just produced for the wine club, and there's a legacy component to it, you know, whereas I see subscription more as like, you know, jump in, jump out. The wine club customer, like,
That's a loyalty,
you really should be offering them something that touches more closely to the center of the business, right? Access to the winemaker, access to
Events or
access to people who are deeply involved in the making of the wines, you know, because that's something they might be interested.
Right.
Access like a special event for their families. It has to be more than just. I think it just has to be more.
It's
Totally agree.
the reason people are in your wine club and are loyal to you are not your product. It's your brand. And
the way they feel.
if you haven't surveyed your wine club and you don't know why they're in the club, you should do that this afternoon. You know, like, I mean, it's not the wine, it's not the discount either.
Right. And one of the questions I saw that I'd like to try to address is, you know, what's the value of a wine club? Is one of the questions that came up. Like, why not just have a loyalty club, which I know has different interpretations. But I can name a couple that I think are really interesting. One is it gives you that platform, as you're describing, to offer a unique or different product that would be a little tougher to sell. And I say that I'm not trying to say, please don't put bad product in the wine club. I'm trying to say, you know, if it's like, hey, this is a special edition of this winery's wine, you know, it's a lot easier to tell that story to somebody who's already very, very engaged. The other thing it allows you to do is plan your products, right? Winemakers are, you know, are at their core, they are engineers and artists, right?
Correct.
And they often opportunistically want to express something that they get an opportunity to do. I found this amazing fruit. I had this great idea while we were doing the winemaking. But you have to be able to plan your products very far in advance.
Absolutely.
And just in terms of the blocking and tackling, having a subscription or a wine club that you have a relatively stable sort of
Recurring
future-looking
revenue.
view of here's my recurring revenue that I can feed certain
Totally.
SKUs into, that is a much easier way than just sort of hoping for the best.
And when I think loyalty, I actually don't think subscription and wine club.
No, of course, yeah.
Okay.
They can be different things, for sure.
Like I really see it more as like the point club. You know?
Yeah.
Let's take a look at slide 33. It's kind of in line with this conversation. Wine club member lifetime value. And so this is a year to year to year view of it. And you know, it's pretty interesting to see, you know, again, how we've moved north, how club members have continued to spend more and more and more and more in the club. Now, you know, for the very first time in 2022, we actually have a little bit of a drop in that. Again, one data point does not make a trend, so I don't freak out over that. But you know, if you also look at the slide that we looked at just previous, if you look at the average months in a club, it's kind of static now. We started in, again, because I look back at 2012, we kind of started at, let's say, 24 months on average for a club member, and now we're up to, I think the number was 33, if I'm remembering right. And now it's kind of static. And so for me, when I think, we talked about this a little bit last night, is if you had the choice between getting your customer to spend more now and increase this value, or getting to stay longer, which do you take?
Easy question, longer.
You take longer. Right?
Longer.
For sure.
Yep.
So it's again, strategies that we don't necessarily put a lot of thought into.
Yeah.
Is how do we extend the lifetime value of a client, or of a customer? But this is again where we get back into data. You know, predictive analytics. You can start to look at how people spend in your clubs, and I was telling this story last night. As I've been taking Spanish on Duolingo for a year and a half, twice a day.
I think you just got a notification.
I probably ding, I got a notification, and you know, I've been a little too busy with this survey, and so I started to back off my work. Instead of doing 15 minutes, I'm just doing 5 just to keep my streak going. And now they're sending me these, because it's gamified, they're sending me these extra, you get 15 minutes, double points, you know. And so it's very clear that they have predictive analytics that they're using to say, okay, when somebody stops a pattern, when somebody starts to move off of a pattern, then that's, you know, there's a 48% or 70% greater likelihood that they're going to quit, right? So this is where we got to get back into data and you know, find those ways to use predictive analytics, look at your customer spend patterns, so that we can now start to expand that lifetime. And you know, I think it's when you know that kind of stuff, there's a point of time where you can go to that customer one-on-one, and it's worth it when you start to look at the you know, the lifetime values of a client. It's certainly worth it to say, have that conversation with them and say, you know, what are you doing? How are you doing? And by the way, when we've seen this before, the phones work. And when you get a phone call from the winery, you pick it up. When you get a phone call from your utility,
Yeah.
you'll let it ring through. But when the winery calls, you answer. By the way, just interesting fact is the open rates back on emails. I just happened to look when I was doing the report this year. The wine industry has the best open rate by far that I can find of any industry.
Agreed.
Of an email.
That's why we do a benchmark.
And the worst, at least in the data I saw, was the health club. So when the health club said, you know, we don't open that, but the winery, you know, people open. So people do want to communicate with us. It's up to us to take that funnel and figure out how to take the data that they have, collect that data, better use it, because that's where the future's headed for us.
And can we please agree that it's not intrusive on our customers to know some of these things. If I get told one more time, like, well, I don't want to bother them, or I don't want, it's like every other industry does what Rob just described. You know, as far as you're just used to it. Your car, when your car lease is coming up, you start getting the direct mail. When you're, you know, cell phone companies, when you start going over your cell phone usage, they start to put things in your bill stuffers, or talk to you about, hey, maybe you should change your plan. Cable companies do this. Like, everybody does this, and it's seen as a customer service. But for some reason in our industry, when we're like, hey, you know, it looks like, you know, you haven't opened the last 5 emails. What's up? You know, it's like, oh, I don't want to bother my customer. I know one winery that does that. They look, and I was really impressed. They look at the last 10 emails, and if you haven't opened it as a club member, they call you. And just be like, hey, how's it going?
Yeah, that's a really, and building on that point, I think that, and this gets back to some of the initial points everybody's been making around using and ingesting data and then using it productively in your interactions with your customers, making sure that you have a basic way of, like, what is a bother, right? A bother is you're hearing not necessarily from someone you don't want to hear from, but about something you maybe don't care about, right? So if you go to the tasting room and you love the Sauvignon Blanc and you make a comment about it to the person running the tasting room, and then you get a bunch of emails from them about their cab, you're probably going to say, like, you know, not really for me, right? But even, you know, as a winery, looking back at, like, do I have a way of recording and somehow segmenting my internal audiences about, well, these folks loved the Sauvignon Blanc, these folks maybe didn't love the cab, so I'm going to focus my, you know, offers and the things I go out to them about on the products I know that they like. I'm shocked sometimes how little information beyond the very basic of basics. This, you know, you're paying someone to spend a whole afternoon with this group of folks, right? They're having a lot of conversations. They're learning a lot of things, right? Think about that experience when you go to the, you know, you go back to that really fancy restaurant and they're like, oh yes, you like sparkling water. You're like, well, yes, like actually,
Yes, I do.
Wow, I do remember. Thank you for remembering, right? Even very, very small gestures like that, right? Like, I think, Rob, you had a really excellent idea that I wanted to make sure got shared, which was, you're going to the tasting room and you get a text that says, hey, we remember, you know, we're doing a vertical for you of this. You told us you loved our single vineyards. We're going to do a vertical for you. You know, the person that you had last time who you said you liked a lot is going to be working with you today. So we're so excited to have you. Just that little tiny touch that really involves just the use of data that we already have access to would grow the experience, you know, 100x for most consumers.
I mean, that's an investment in a CDP, which is like, you know,
a CDP.
A CDP. It's, you know, it's a customer development platform. I mean, it basically is a CRM, but even more specific. So you are coming to the winery. We have a reservation for you. You go into your CDP. We know your whole historical, what you bought, what you returned, who your mom is, who your dad is, like all of the information.
Totally, if you're a small winery, if you're a 2,000 case a year winery, it's also okay to have that in Microsoft Word.
Absolutely,
right?
Well said. Yes, you can absolutely have that.
But you have to have it, and you have to not be afraid of it, because it's not intrusive. It's actually what people expect.
And even the online suppliers today of sales, you know, people that are selling by credit card, you know, Wine Direct, those kind of, you know, they have that information that they can give you. So it's
it's there.
Yeah, it's all totally doable.
And if it's not there, you can do a data append for like $200.
Yeah.
And you can get it.
Yeah.
Rob, I want to share with you a really positive statistic, because I know that we're going to eventually close here, but something that I think is to remember. And I've seen this in many presentations in peer companies, but this is from an outside research firm from this year. Wine holds the largest market share in the alcohol e-commerce market, followed by beer and other liquor today.
Yeah, that's DTC is the space that we've leveraged successfully. And, you know, I go back longer than I want to acknowledge. But you know, I remember, you know, the days where, you know, before Granholm, and you know, we were shipping to states, maybe not totally legally, and when I started to see what was happening with distribution and cutting out the smaller, and I don't blame distributors for wanting to do things efficiently. And they, we had this huge bulge in new wineries new SKUs. It's an amazing number that we're continuing to make every year. So I don't blame the distributors for wanting to do that. But there was a scary time, between let's call it 94 and when Granholm was approved, 93, 92, something like that, where I was wondering, how are we going to get through this? And and again, back to the J
I
sheet.
thought that was 2005. Was it 2000? No.
It was
Granholm versus Held was 2005.
Yeah.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and so the 90s were actually, I'm sorry, I'm off by a decade, so I'm thinking of like 2000, 2001. That period of time was awkward.
Well, D2C was a dirty word. I remember I worked at Treasury at that point, and it was like they kept us in this separate building, and we just our only goal was to not piss off distributors. We've come so far.
Yeah, there was a question that came up that I want to make sure I took a moment to answer, which was, what direction do we think direct shipper regulation is going to take, and acknowledging that this is a tricky subject. I would say that my personal crystal ball guess is that there will continue to be some amount of liberalization, and I think that states are going to be paying more and more attention to making sure that rules are being followed, that if they're shipping to an aggregate volume limit state, one of those fantastic pieces of jargon about making sure that you're shipping the right amount to a person and address, I believe you will see increased attention. And I also think that over time, it all completely depends on it. All it would take would be one case making its way to the Supreme Court that blows this market open. But I believe that wineries are going to occupy a really favorable spot and will continue to occupy a favorable spot. There's a case going through, I think it's Rhode Island right now, about allowing direct shipments from outside the state. My guess, that is not to be construed as legal advice, but is my guess based on as a non-legal observer, is that those will continue to liberalize.
I guess I'm going into the concept of the total alcohol market share. Like, I think DTC, but I also now think grocery. And so the story that wineries have, the brand stories, are so much more powerful in my mind compared to other competitors within the adult
100%.
beverage space. And so we should be thinking about that as an industry. Okay, we're a leader right now. How can we take that content to our retail partners? How can we make sure that our story is consistently presented digitally wherever a customer can access our brand? This is what this says to me. Like, you're not behind, you're ahead, and you can stay ahead.
Right.
Isn't it nice to have control over sales? I mean, we do. We have a lot more than we used to, for sure.
Well, and a lot of it is what you and I, Andrew, have been talking about, like the fourth tier, which is all of these online channels and the Instacarts. I mean, if you're not on there controlling how your product's coming up and being shown, and whether you have your 95-point score or whether you have your drill down page that tells more about the product, these are free tools that you can log into and make sure that your brand is represented well and that you're intersecting consumers where they're buying.
Yep. I mean, wine is an industry that is essentially built for the written word.
Yes, right?
I mean, I certainly don't mean to demean any of our competitors.
Yeah.
But if you are a brand of vodka and you make the vodka in the same way and you're just shooting for consistency, there's not much of a story to tell about a vintage. There's not much of a story to tell about the inputs. We got the best potatoes we could, right? But with wine, there are a million stories that could be told, and it could be beneficially told to an audience, and that consumers want to hear. So
I agree.
our industry is naturally positioned for an advantage here. And I think that maybe one of the messages to come out of this that I was hoping to share was, I'd like to see our industry take more advantage of that natural position we occupy.
Yeah.
Agree.
Well, now I really mean it. Now, we are out of time. But before we depart the day, I think it's important for me to just again thank all of the respondents that responded to the survey. This is a partnership that Silicon Valley Bank does with the industry, and without the survey data, we can't do it. It doesn't take a long time to fill out surveys. We only send out 2 a year. But it's critical for us to get those for us to do what we do. And I know how hard your days are, how easy it is to say, somebody else will do it. But I beg you, please do it. And I think you'll find it's worthwhile. Everybody that filled out this survey is going to get about 100 charts, and you're going to get the data itself. So we're talking about data, how to use it. We have 10 years of data all lined up, and if you've been doing this for 10 years, you have all that data yourself, and you can start developing your own trends, your own benchmarks. By using this. This doesn't exist anywhere else. And so I'd hate to see this this thing kind of go away because of thinking that somebody else will do the survey.
If this year didn't kill it, nothing will.
Yeah,
Right? You come out stronger.
This year was an interesting year. So anyways, at this point you can access the report on svb.com. And I'm asking you to watch, probably end of September, we'll have the annual State of the Industry survey come out, and I beg you, please, promote the survey, fill out the survey. We'd love to see, greater numbers anyways. But with that, I'd like to thank all of our guests. Thank you guys for coming and sharing your great knowledge with the industry. I know the industry appreciates it. And I'm grateful to be here. It's as I'm thinking about the last 120 days. But thank you very much for tuning in today and seeing us. And I hope to see you again at Silicon Valley Bank in the future.